Hello and welcome to Dialogue Options, Games Radar's bi-weekly show where we take our favourite gaming theories and opinions and we put them to you. I'm Ellen, Games Radar's video producer, and I'm joined today by Alex, Games Radar's features writer, and Rachel,
Hello.
Games Radar's US managing editor, and today we're going to be talking about DLCs, specifically our favourites and what we think makes them so great. And I'm looking forward to this chat personally because, as I recently admitted to both of you, I'm quite bad for actually seeing through, especially DLC where you have to play it at the end of a game. I'm notoriously bad for like putting down the controller at the end of the main game and going, no, that's enough. So I'm hoping you've both got some that are going to kind of help me sift through the ones that aren't so good and find the ones that are really worth my time. No pressure. But Alex, if you don't mind starting us off, if you want to give us a DLC that you like and what you like about it.
Yeah, I mean, I should also probably start with the caveat that, my favorite DLCs aren't just ones that offer more of the same in that sense, which is sort of the standard thing that you'd expect, where it's just, it's normally in 4 parts as part of a season pass, here's a new map and just do the same thing in essentially the same universe. But, the really special pieces of DLC for me are the ones that go the extra mile and use it as an opportunity for new forms of storytelling, within a tighter format, often set with new characters and new settings and new universes. I think of stuff like Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry, which, swapped out Kenway, and it was, this really like interesting take on slavery on the West Coast and stuff like that is exciting to me because it's not just about sort of abiding by certain templates that are expected from publishers, but actually making the most of what you have as a developer to perhaps bring in stuff that you might have had to cut as part of the main campaign. So for me, the one that's really I prefer out of all of them is Bioshock Infinite's Burial at Sea DLC. It came in 2 parts, and it released about a year after the launch of the main game. And even the very setup, if you're a Bioshock fan, is exciting because they sort of pitched it as this thing where you're still playing as Booker DeWitt, who's the main character of the campaign, and you're still with Elizabeth, who's your sidekick, and other stuff which I won't spoil. But this time you're in Rapture, which is the setting of the original Bioshock and Bioshock 2. You're not in Columbia, but Rapture's different this time around. This is Rapture before the fall, and it's got this really nice sort of crime noir feel to it. So you're an investigator, it's Booker DeWitt, and Elizabeth comes knocking at your door, asking you to investigate this thing that's happening in Bioshock, in Rapture, sorry, which may or may not be connected to the events of the very first game. But by the end, Burial at Sea is a very different experience to what you might have expected from that first reveal. It sort of slowly uncovers itself to have these really deep connections to both the first 2 Bioshock games in Rapture, but also Infinite. And not only does it do that, but it sort of completely like readjusts your entire perspective on what you played in Infinite's campaign. It says, no, what you saw during that campaign actually, not only was that not completely what actually happened, but the ramifications of that ending are still being felt across these multiple dimensions and universes. I don't really want to get too much into the plot because A, it's quite spoilery, but B, like it would take me about 20 minutes to explain. It's quite convoluted, but it's got some really nice like twists and turns, like almost retconnings of stuff that you just assumed about certain characters and certain parts of Columbia and Infinite. And then there's part 2 as well, which so in part 1 you're playing as Booker DeWitt, and it's kind of like the same gameplay as Infinite. It's a first-person shooter. There's combat. Elizabeth's your sidekick. But in part 2, for reasons again which I don't want to get into, you play as Elizabeth. And suddenly your whole way of playing Bioshock is changed. Like Elizabeth obviously can create tears and which are like portals to different dimensions, but she's not a soldier like Booker. She hasn't been in war, and so suddenly you've got this quite quite scary stealth game. I really love everything about it. I really like the way it wraps up the entire story, like surprisingly confidently, in the way that sort of all these dangling plot threads from the end of Infinite are suddenly sort of wrapped up. Yet there's still a sense of ambiguity and mystery around sort of the ending and all the different interpretations of it. I just think they did a really good job. And it's a shame that Irrational shut down, because I'd have loved to see an extension of that story and a continuation of that story. But at the same time, Burial at Sea was like a really fitting ending for me.
I feel like the Bioshock games they really knock it out of the park. So I wanted to give a shout out to Minerva's Den, which was Bioshock 2 DLC, and that was similar in just the way that it was such a brilliant story. It was a kind of standalone little adventure where you played Subject Sigma, who was a kind of a big daddy, but it dealt with so many like amazing ideas that had only been kind of hinted at before in Bioshock games, like AI. There was a lot to do with like sort of grief and family and World War II and ethics, and it just really took like some of those ideas that they almost didn't have time to go into in the original game, and then made a beautiful kind of story out of it, and just let you go deeper into it. And I know a lot of people at the time actually were, liked Minerva's Den more than the main Bioshock 2 story, which I think is a bit harsh, but I think that just speaks to like what good quality Minerva's Den was. And it was the perfect thing for fans, because I think I'm the same as you a bit, Ellen. Like sometimes it depends on the game, but and my top pick for best DLC is definitely something that just continues the main game. But sometimes that can feel a bit strange, like that idea of you're just suddenly back in the same world, and now a new little chunk's been added on or whatever. Whereas this, because it was a standalone story, but that very much complemented what you just played, it was a nice way to stay in the world without just kind of tacking a bit on to the end.
I find that sometimes, in the same way that I'm less likely to platinum a game if I have a lot to do outside of finishing the main campaign, I just find, and I know that there's some DLC like the Horizon Zero Dawn one that's raved about, but it's something about the ending to Horizon Zero Dawn being this like massive crescendo, and then to then go, now carry on playing as her, that sometimes loses me, because I like to leave it where the main game intended on it being left. I'm not saying that it's not canon or anything, but I
no, but it is weird where they're like, suddenly there's this like new, you've played through like the whole adventure, you've explored every inch of the world, and then suddenly it's like, oh, there's that, have you looked in that ice cave? And then suddenly like there's a whole new area that you kind of definitely haven't seen before. But I know that feeling.
I tend to gravitate more towards DLC that pads out something that already exists, whether that's sort of a story that happened before the main story, so it just adds more texture and backstory to the characters, or like with Skyrim's DLC, a lot of them just add to the world that you're already in. So like with Hearthfire, you can build your house and you can adopt children and you can hire a bard to hang around your house. I'm not so keen on the adopting children bit because they're incredibly annoying and they just ask for allowance all the time, but for me that just added this extra layer that wasn't there already, and I went all in on that because I married Mjol and she deserves the best house possible. But that's the sort of DLC that I tend to gravitate towards more, that isn't really demanding too much more of you in terms of furthering the story. It's just sort of heightening what's already there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I do have to say though, my absolutely top, and this isn't, this is not like hot take or like, what a contrarian opinion, but mine is just Witcher 3's Blood and Wine, because I feel like, as well as being like an incredibly massive adventure with some really kind of wonderful and weird moments in it, it really was kind of CD Projekt's Red way. You really felt like they wanted to leave Geralt in like a good place. They wanted, fans to be able to kind of say goodbye to Geralt and know that he would be okay, so I don't want to go like Alex, I don't want to go too much into plot details. I feel like anyone who's played Witcher 3 will have ended up playing Blood and Wine, because it's just such a, it's so raved about. But and by the end of it, you can end up with Geralt like has his own vineyard, and depending on the ending you get a sense that he's just going to happily grow old in that vineyard with his chosen companion. But there's also some like wonderful weird stuff in it, like there's a curse, and there's a bit where you go into like a fairy tale land, which is just bananas. You're kind of running around having to deal with all these like fairy tale archetypes and everything, to save one of the women. And but it just, one of the things I love about it is it's like massively good value without being mercenary about it. But it's like, it's huge. The attention they've paid to like adding extra kind of dialogue, and, there's a whole new Gwent deck, and there's new, items. There's full, proper big quests. It's not like, one slightly weedy quest line. And it just, and it felt very different to any of the other areas you'd been to in The Witcher before. It just really did. Like, I remember crying when I finished it, because there is a bit at the end where kind of Geralt looks to the camera, or what would be the camera if it was a movie, and you really feel like it's a little kind of just a little sign off to the players that have been with him that long, which I think is why so many people rave about it so much, because as much as well as being just a really good example of how you do DLC right in terms of rewarding players for spending that extra money and extra time, it also kind of had a real emotional impact for anyone that had spent hundreds of hours just wandering around with grumpy Geralt.
Blood and Wine is like a great example of like, it's almost like an epilogue or like an encore, in a way that it's not like Horizon Zero Dawn, which is Frozen Wilds DLC, which is like, oh, there's a new threat, oh, you've taken it out, good job, until next time. That was very much a goodbye send off to Geralt. And like, I mean, the other example of that, which I really enjoy as well, is Mass Effect Freeze, the Citadel DLC, which I'm sure Heather has talked about before, but
yeah,
like it's
a couple of videos ago actually.
Okay. So I won't dwell too much on it, but like, it is genuinely a like, in the same way as Blood and Wine, it's a genuinely heartwarming send off, not just to Shepard, but to all of your crewmates who you've developed relationships with over the course of, well, potentially 3 games. And so, yeah, like, in addition to those sort of spin-off / isolated DLCs that we were talking about loving so much, there's also a way to expand a continuing story, but that doesn't feel trite, but actually feels like needed and necessary. And Blood and Wine and the Citadel are just 2 great examples of that.
I'm currently playing Dragon Age Inquisition, and finally playing it. There's been so many videos where I'm like, I'm going to get around to playing that. But I love it so much that the fact that there is DLC is kind of making me feel less scared of finishing it, because I'm very aware that I'm a mission away. I'm like 1 mission away from this is going to end the main campaign bit, and I've been putting it off. I'm like, well, there's going to be more.
Oh, it made me, the bit where like at the end you're gathering your companions together for like the final bit really made me well up in Dragon Age Inquisition, because there was that sense of like, we're getting close to the end, and like the whole band's coming together to finish things.
And I think that's,
I definitely I like when I'm playing something I love, I definitely like knowing there's going to be more of it.
Do we have any other honourable mentions that we want to put forward before I wrap up?
In the olden days, I used to get very annoyed where you would get DLC for a game and then it would just be like a weird arena mode or a weird multiplayer add-on that you're just like, no one wanted this. Maybe they did. But, for me, it's absolutely like, give me more story, give me more to do, just fill the map up again. Let me just spend time wandering around. I'd love to see like a standalone adventure for Red Dead Redemption 2.
Oh, absolutely.
Even though, again, I feel like, they've obviously got Red Dead Online, but I'd love a standalone Sadie adventure. Just 20 hours of Sadie going around being a bounty hunter and stuff. I adore that. But, I think Rockstar's time is very much, and probably sensibly, money is very much focused on keeping Red Dead Online fresh and building stories into that. But that's definitely a world I would go back into in a heartbeat.
So those are some of our favourite DLCs. Feel free to suggest yours in the comments below. If you also want to suggest some that don't exist but should, if you think that you can top a Sadie Adler DLC, then feel free to try. Thank you. Thanks Rach and Alex and Batman for being in this week's video. Subscribe to Games Radar for more dialogue options, and thanks for watching. Goodbye.
Bye.